Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Penn Vicarage on this Friday morning. Lovely to see you. Thank you for joining us for our Bible talk for today. Friends, as it's Friday, may I just remind you, as I always do on a Friday, that we have some wonderful services this weekend at St. Bart's and St. Anne's, and you'd be very, very welcome indeed to join us for those. We'd love to see you, and we'd be a better church with you in it. But there we go. But we continue our adventure through the Psalms. Now, today's Psalm 114. Just to give you a little bit of context before we start, there are 150 Psalms, 5 books of Psalms. We're in book 5 now. And Psalms 113 to 118, the 6 Psalms there, are what's called the Hebrew Hillel, is called. So basically, these are the Psalms that are used at the Passover. And the first 2, which is 113 and yesterday, 114 today, they're the ones that are used before the feast, and 115, 16, 17 and 18 are the ones that are used after the feast. They're the ones that Jesus would have used just before he went to Gethsemane and so on. So bear in mind, Jesus would have said these Psalms the night before he died, which kind of puts it in context. So what you've got here is you've got 6 Psalms, 2 said before the meal, 4 said after. And so without further ado, here goes. Psalm 114. When Israel came out of Egypt, the house of Jacob from a people of a strange language, Judah became God's sanctuary, Israel his dominion. The sea looked and fled, Jordan turned back. The mountains skipped like rams, the hills like lambs. Why is it, O sea, that you flee? O Jordan, that you turn back? O mountains, that you skip like rams? O hills like lambs? Tremble, O earth, at the presence of the Lord, at the presence of the God of Jacob, who turns the rock into a pool of water, the flint into a spring of water. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Okay, so just to kind of remind you, this is a Passover meal, and so it's the time when the Jewish people, and they do it to this day, they recount and remember the time when God set them free from slavery in Egypt and take them across the desert to the promised land. And they have this meal, and they have it every year to kind of remember this, and remembering God's goodness, God's deliverance, and the fact that God set them free. And so every year they have this meal, and they kind of do it to celebrate, but also to kind of keep the message passing on. And there's a lovely bit in the meal where the youngest person asks the person in charge of the feast, tell me the story, and they kind of go through it, and they eat various bits of food, just kind of remind them of the bitterness, remind them of the lamb, and so on and so on and so on. So here you have these 6 Psalms connected with the Passover, as I say, 2 before the meal and 4 after. And Psalm 114 is the one which, more than the others, talks in particular about the Exodus, what we call the Exodus, the time, as I say, when God saw his people were enslaved in Egypt, and under a guy called Moses, set them free. They went across the desert for 40 years, then they went over the Jordan River into the promised land. So this is the psalm which really kind of reminds us of that in particular. Now, before we get into the psalm in particular, I just want to point out a particular kind of poetic technique which is used here. I mentioned before earlier that the psalms are basically songs and hymns and what you want to call it, which inevitably means they've got poetry in them. And of course, poetry is a bit different in Hebrew to what it is in English. But a technique we noticed the last couple of days that they used a thing called an acrostic, where it goes like A, B, C, D through. And this psalm uses a thing called parallelism, which you see quite often used in the Psalms, where kind of each verse or each pair of verses kind of repeats what it's saying. So, for example, here we go. When Israel came out of Egypt, when Israel came out of Egypt, the house of Jacob from a people of a strange language. So it's saying the same thing twice. He came out of Egypt, the house of Jacob from a strange language. Then he goes on, Judah became God's sanctuary, Israel his dominion. So again, I want you to see here, if you can, that a lot of use of the word of kind of parallelism here, where they they say something and then they kind of repeat it in the second half of the verses. Sometimes they do it in pairs, sometimes they even do it in threes as well. But in this psalm, all the way through, from beginning to end, you've got parallelism used. So you've got this kind of poetry thing going on here. So the words are quite clever in the sense that they're telling a story, but they're kind of using poetry to do so, if you see what I mean. So that's the kind of so far you've got the context, you've got the fact it's a Passover meal, you've got the fact that it's using parallelism here. Then you've got what's going on in the psalm itself. And it's interesting because it tells again the story of the Exodus. Now you hear in the book of Exodus, you hear the story of Moses leading God's people to freedom from the promised land and so on. Then you've got Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, which tell the story of them going across the desert. And then right at the end, and then in the book of Joshua, you've got them going into the promised land. And what you have there in Exodus and books after is really the story of God leading his people, but it's very much from the people's point of view. So it talks about what Moses did, what the people did, and what the people didn't do, and how they should have behaved, and how they didn't behave, and how they should have trusted, and they didn't trust him, blah, 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 blah. But it very much tells the story from a human point of view. What in a sense you have here in Psalm 114 is you get kind of the God perspective of what's going on. So it talks about the sea looked and fled, Jordan turned back, the mountains skipped like rams, the hills like lambs. So in a sense, what you've got here in Psalm 114 is, whereas in the other ones, in Exodus and so on, you get the Exodus from a human point of view. In Psalm 114, you've got it from sort of God's point of view. A bit like, they say that you can't see the wood for the trees. Usually, from the book of Exodus, you've got sort of the trees point of view. Here you've got the wood point of view, if you see what I mean. So Exodus, Numbers, and so on, they tell the story of God setting his people free, but from the point of view of the human beings in it. Psalm 114 here kind of gives you the God perspective. Okay, so what have we got in this psalm? Verses 1 and 2 sets the scene. When Israel went out from Egypt. So it basically sets the story. So he's saying this is about God setting his people free in Egypt. That's what verses 1 and 2 say. Then you've got the story in verses 3 and 4 of God dividing the Red Sea and God stopping the Jordan. He parted the Red Sea so that people can get out of Egypt, and he stopped the Jordan so that people could cross to go into the promised land. So the sea looked and fled. That's the Red Sea. Jordan turned back. Okay, can you see that? So you can see, you've got the two things going. So you've got the sea looked and fled, Jordan turned back. So you've got the story there of God setting his people free from Egypt across the Red Sea, and you've also got him stopping the River Jordan in order so the people could get across to go into the promised land. Okay. It says that the mountains skipped like rams, the hills like that. So it tells the story there of what actually happened. That when he set them free, the sea looked and fled, Jordan turned back. And because because God is so great, this is what the sea did. And God is so great, this is what the river did. And God is so great that this is what the mountains did. And then in verses 5 and 6, you've got kind of the same thing again, but from a slightly more gloating point of view. So there's a bit of taunting going. So why is it, O sea, that you fled? O Jordan, that you turned back? O mountains, O hills like rams? Why? Because it's basically, it's a bit of taunting going on here. Because what it's saying is that God is great, and in the sight of God, the sea parted, the river stopped, and the mountains said, why? Why? It's a bit of taunting going on here. And then he finishes it up in verses 7 and 8. Well, what the message is to us. The message to us is, tremble, O earth, at the presence of the Lord, at the presence of the God of Jacob. So remember just how great God is. Just remember, just what a wonderful God is. And remember how powerful God is. And remember, and as I said a few times last week, I think we can get a bit cuddly with God sometimes. That God is our Abba, God's our daddy, but God is also God in heaven. And at his presence, the sea parts and the river stop and the mountains. So that's how great our God is. And we need to remember just what a great God we have. And then finally in verse 8, having stopped the war, having parted the sea, which is a massive thing, and having stopped a river, which was great in those days. And then he talks about who turns the rock into a pool of water. So that God is both capable of parting seas and stopping rivers and things, but God is also so good with us that he's prepared to, as Moses did in Exodus chapter 17, he strikes the rock and water comes up to give drink to his people too. So what this is saying is, he tells the story of Exodus from God's point of view, and he's saying, why did it happen? It's because God is so great. And the message to us is, remember how great God is, and give God the respect that he deserves. But to remember that God is so good, he's so powerful, but also he's so good that he uses that same water. You know, it's not just good for, you know, parting seas and things. He actually strikes rocks so that we can drink out of the self same water. And hope, yeah. Anyway, I hope that's helpful. Read it again. It's only a short psalm, Psalm 114. Bless you, my friends. Have a lovely weekend. Hope to see some of you at church. Do please share these messages now with your friends, especially while we can't use St. Bart's Facebook page at the moment for some reason. Thank you for using the St. Anne's one. Do please, as I say, share these messages with your friends. Other people can enjoy them too. Have a lovely weekend. God bless you.